we can proceed further on with a presentation from Israel. And I would like to invite Asaf, Mayrose to present their work.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf. I'm from Israel. And we are actually 3 colleagues in our delegation. Walter and I were working for the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority, which is a governmental agency. We are freelance ecologists. And Noam Weiss, who is working for the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel, which is an NGO. And the question that we are now asking ourselves is whether the release of Bonelli's eagles from captive breeding does contribute to population rehabilitation. It's a project that we are running for about 20 years now. And on the way, we will show some very interesting dispersal patterns of also the wild population. So a few words about the Bonellis in Israel. It is a species of conservation concern now, with about 20 breeding pairs, in compared to more than 60 pairs that we used to have about 50 years ago. And we are running an active conservation measures, quite a few. I listed only few of them as part of the species action plan. So it is a question whether this measure, the captive breeding and release, is contributing more than other measures, as we will show in the graphs. So the motivation for the reinforcement program was the disappearance. These white circles here are territories that were abandoned during the 1950s and 60s and even 70s, mainly due to pesticides. Okay, and this is the overall trend of the population. So we see quite obvious recovery during the last years, thanks to our management scheme. And our breeding nucleus is a place in northern Israel near the city of Haifa. It is a breeding center for 7 endangered species. One of them is the Bonelli eagle. So these are the breeding cages and the more quiet and isolated area of this reserve. And so the source of the breeding pairs, all of them or most of them were collected in the wild in Israel after they got electrocuted. But they were rehabilitated and brought to this breeding center. So most of the nestlings are being raised by their biological parents until they fledge in the natal site, in their cages. They are learning to hunt together with the parents, and only after that, they are being transferred to the released pen in 2 sites. For quite a few years, we ran one release site in the Golan Heights, okay, far away from the natal site, from the parents. And then in the last few years, we are releasing the eaglets here on the Carmel Mountain, very close to their parents. So that's basically the only difference, or the major difference between these 2 release sites, because the methods of the release are similar. Okay, it is soft release from these acclimatization pans. So we have few indications, or very few indications, for the recruitment of these captive bred individuals into the breeding population. But it is impossible to separate the contribution of each of these management actions that we are running. For example, here in red, I put all the individuals that were released from the breeding nucleus. And in orange, these are individuals that hatched from a nest in the wild that were kept, that were guarded in order to prevent harvesting of the nest. Okay, so these are 2 actions that operated in parallel, and we cannot separate between them, and to justify this improvement in the population, the overall positive trend. In order to do that, to understand the impact of the releasing, we launched a telemetry study about 5 years ago, and we will examine its result as well as the telemetry study of the wild birds. Okay, so I'm starting here with the wild birds. So this is the map of Israel, and it is divided to different biogeographic zones. The one here in the light green is the Mediterranean area with more than 400 millimeters of rain per year. And this is the desert region of Israel with less than 250 millimeters. And in between, that's the steppe or the semi-arid area where eagles are also breeding here in the eastern parts. So on the left, the map on the left is the routes of the tagged individuals, okay? The ones in yellow and orange, these are the ones that were tagged in the desert region, okay? And in blues, these are the ones tagged in the Mediterranean areas of northern Israel, and the one in red, these are individuals tagged in the steppe region. And we can already judge even by simply looking at the routes that there is a huge difference between the dispersal patterns of these subpopulations or different groups. When the desert ones are obviously flying further away, they're flying south, and apparently many of them are getting, let's say, trapped or avoiding to cross the water bodies here, so they stay in Sinai Peninsula, as the bird that Stavros just showed from Greece. And the rest of them are continuing south. They almost never stop in the Sahara Desert, probably because it's too hostile for them to stay, and they continue until they reach the Sahel in Sudan and Ethiopia, or a parallel region in Yemen. Now we had the captive born one, the captive hatched one, this map on the right, and these are the two subgroups that we released from the different sites. Okay, so in dark grays here, these are the ones released near their parents on the Carmel Mountain, where they were born. And in blues, you see the ones that were released in the Golan Heights, far away from their parents. And again, we can see a huge difference in their dispersal routes, dispersal patterns. I will show you a few graphs, but in order for you to understand better what I'm showing, I will show an individual dispersal route of Bonelli's eagle. Okay, this is a single individual released in the Golan Heights. Now it's in Yemen. That's the first dispersal area. He's spending few months in Iraq, then few months in Sinai, continue down to Ethiopia, flying back to Iraq, and ending up coming back to Israel. So that's over a course of 2 years. Okay, we take the same individual, we put it on a graph, the same method as Stavros just showed. So the y-axis is the distance from home, and these are days since the release. And we see the different dispersal area that this individual spent the time in. When we clamp quite a few individuals together, we are getting the overall pattern, and we can average across them and so see the pattern. So this is the average, and this is the standard error. So let's take a look first at the wild birds. Okay, these are nature wild birds that hatch naturally in the wild, in the same areas as I explained earlier. So in red here, these are birds from the desert region of Israel. Okay. In green, these are birds that hatched in the Mediterranean zone, and the blue ones are from the semi-desert region. Here below, we see the sample size, okay, because some of the eaglets are dying as the time passes. Again, we can see very obviously, very clearly that the desert ones are flying further away from their home, okay, like about 1,000 kilometers on average. When we put the same routes, we put them on a climate layer of mean annual precipitation. Okay, this is the layer. We are getting these graphs. Okay, so here the y-axis stands for mean annual precipitation, and these are the days since the fledgling, since the or the release of the individual. And we see again the desert guys, the desert subpopulation is staying more or less around the same habitat, the same climate where they were born, around 250 millimeters of rain. And here the Mediterranean individuals, the same, they stay more or less around the 600 millimeters, and the semi-desert somewhere in between. Now we go to the captive bred ones. And so these are in here in pink. These are the ones that were released in the Ramat Golan, in the Golan Heights, very far away from their natal sites, from their parents, in compare to this group here in blue, the ones that were released near their natal sites, near their parents, where they were in contact actually with their parents during the release period. And it is quite striking the great differences between these two groups. Again, if we put it against the mean annual precipitation, we can see the ones here released far away from their parents, choosing to fly more south, more or less like the wild birds from the desert region of Israel. So here I put all the 5 different groups. This is the one in pink is the ones that were released far away from their parents, from their natal cages. And here in purple, these are the ones that were released close to their parents. These are the ones from the desert regions. And here we have the other 2 groups of the Mediterranean and semi-desert. As for mortality factors, so these are captive-born here on the left, and on the right, these are nature-born, wild-born birds. Yellow stands for electrocution. So we see that most of the mortality inside Israel is caused by electrocution, whereas outside Israel, we have direct persecution here in red. These are birds that are either trapped or shot outside in the neighboring countries. And a large portion of unknown cases, unsolved cases, most of them are probably also related to direct persecution, because when a bird is electrocuted, we can see on the orthophoto, we can see that it is lying on a line, on an electricity pylon. And so we can see obviously that more like 40% of the captive bred individuals, they are dying outside Israel, whereas only 20% of the wild birds are dying outside. As to survival rates, we see here in orange, these are the nature ones, and we see that they are surviving better. They are doing better in the wild in compared to the captive ones across all the ages until the age of 4th calendar. As to recruitment, also the same pattern. I mean, nature ones, they are recruiting earlier and in better percentages in compared to captive birds. So to sum it up, there are significant differences in the habitat preferences of juvenile Bonelli's eagles during their dispersal, depending on their natal sites. Where eagles from each biogeographic zone, the Mediterranean, in the desert and the semi-desert, tend to stay in the same zone during their dispersal. And I think this is the first time that at least I see something like it. I don't think it was mentioned for any other species of eagle. This kind of philopatry and preferences to the natal climate and the biogeographic zone. And eagles from the desert region are flying longer distances, maybe due to the need to cross the Sahara, which is too hostile for them. As to the captive bred one, we have evidence that the release of these eagles from the breeding nucleus does contribute to the wild population. However, captive bred individuals that are released far from their parents tend to disperse further away, so they are showing lesser philopatry. Captive bred eagles have lower survival rates, and they tend less to recruit into the wild population, breeding population. But we should remember that other than their direct contribution of releasing the eaglets, the breeding nucleus enable us to intervene in the breeding attempts of the wild population and increase its productivity. Okay, for example, when we have infertile eggs that are being incubated for a long period of time, then Walter is doing this job, is rappelling down to the nest, bringing fertile eggs from the breeding nucleus, and then we can increase the productivity of this pair. So thank you to be as patient as those ibexes here in the back that are waiting for the Bonellis to clear the water trough. And thank you for listening.